when you look at a globe, the lines dividing up the land masses feel, they feel so permanent.
Right, they really
Yeah, like those borders represent centuries of diplomacy, shared human history, and just this underlying agreement that nations exist alongside one another. It's basically the foundational framework of how we understand global society.
Absolutely.
But today, we are throwing that entire framework right out the window, so we're welcoming you, the listener, to an exploration of a reality that is just, well, it's as dense as it is deeply unsettling.
It really is.
We're doing a deep dive into an excerpt from a work called Atoll, and this text projects a terminal paradigm shift. Basically, an alternative timeline where the Axis powers achieved total, unquestioned global hegemony after a massive global conflict.
Yeah, and to tackle a text this extreme, we need to be incredibly clear about our mission today.
Right.
We are dissecting this as a purely hypothetical blueprint of a nightmare. We're studying the architecture of this dystopian world, not, endorsing any of the ideologies within it.
Exactly. Definitely not endorsing it.
Right. We just want to understand the raw mechanics of how the author constructed such an absolute totalitarian reality. And the foundational premise here is the complete and utter dismantling of the Westphalian concept of national sovereignty.
Which is, that's huge.
It's massive.
Right.
We are so accustomed to a system where each nation-state has exclusive sovereignty over its territory. But in the reality of Shoah, that concept has just been eradicated.
Yeah.
We aren't just examining shifted borders here. We are looking at a complete rewrite of the biological, environmental, and sociological fabric of human existence.
And the scope of that rewrite is just staggering. Imagine a world where the very concept of diplomacy has vanished from the human toolkit.
Right. Gone entirely.
A world where the Mediterranean Sea is intentionally drained dry to create land, and where the word privacy hasn't just been violated, it has been systematically erased from human language.
It's chilling.
It really is. But before we can even begin to understand how an individual survives in this reality, we kind of have to establish the physical parameters of the map.
Yeah, the geography is key.
Right, and looking at the geography of this new Earth, the Greater Germanic Reich doesn't just conquer Europe. It expands its absolute territory far beyond the Ural Mountains, turning into this monolithic, transcontinental superstate.
Yeah, it occupies a massive portion of the globe, basically bifurcating the world into two dominating spheres of influence. You have the Reich on one side and the Japanese Empire on the other.
But they don't share, a neat bureaucratic border where trade and negotiation happen, right?
No, not at all. The dividing line between these two massive spheres is this sprawling, desolate, highly radioactive dead zone. And it spans across Central Asia and literally swallows the entire North American continent.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like the ultimate horrifying version of a geopolitical staring contest, separated by a radioactive moat.
That is a perfect way to put it.
It's like you have two apex predators forced to share a cage, but they've poisoned the middle of the cage so neither can cross without destroying themselves.
What's fascinating here is how this arrangement is formalized into something they call the Twilight War.
Right, the Twilight War.
Yeah. And this isn't a temporary ceasefire. It's not some tense negotiation period before a peace treaty is signed.
Yeah.
This perpetual simmering state of cold conflict is entirely intentional. It's actually structurally necessary for the regime's survival.
Because a totalitarian state of this magnitude requires a permanent state of emergency.
Exactly.
Because if the threat of annihilation is perpetually hovering over the populace, the state has this ironclad excuse for the complete subjugation of the individual.
Precisely. You can't demand civil rights or, better working conditions when the government insists the apocalypse is perpetually 5 minutes away.
Right. It effectively murders diplomacy because diplomacy implies equality and the possibility of a peaceful resolution. Instead, the globe is organized into this draconian hierarchy, vassal states, resource extraction zones, and just heavily militarized buffers.
Yeah, the Twilight War acts as a societal pressure cooker, but one where the regime completely controls the heat. And maintaining that level of heat, sustaining perpetual total war economy across continents, it requires a volume of resources that just boggles the mind.
I can't even imagine.
To feed that machine, the state takes a historical blueprint called General Plan Ost, which was originally a wartime strategy for the subjugation of Eastern Europe, and escalates it into a mundane global administrative principle.
Which is, Turning atrocities into mundane, daily bureaucracy is terrifying.
It really is.
The systematic displacement, exploitation, and eradication of populations deemed undesirable aren't treated as chaotic wartime violence anymore.
No, they become highly bureaucratized functions of the state.
It's clinical. It's literally an algorithmic quota system executed by accountants and administrators. You have these vast agricultural combines, they call them Lebensraum, stretching endlessly across the former Soviet territories. Yeah.
And they operate on this brutal, mechanized system of indentured servitude, completely geared toward feeding the demographic expansion of the core Reich.
And, managing those massive populations requires absolute psychological control. The state utilizes forced sterilization programs and the total suppression of indigenous cultures.
Right.
The sociological architecture is specifically engineered to crush any collective memory of a time before the regime. Indigenous languages are outlawed, local traditions are criminalized, and historical continuity is totally severed.
But wait, there's a massive structural vulnerability there, I think.
How so?
If a state crushes native languages and completely erases a population's historical continuity, how does that society function day to day?
That's a good point.
Doesn't the human mind inherently need a shared history, like a common narrative, to cooperate and build complex infrastructure? I mean, you can't run a transcontinental agricultural combine if your workforce doesn't have a shared baseline of communication and trust. Well, that assumption holds true in a free society. But in this paradigm, the state doesn't actually want willing cooperation.
Oh, right.
It requires clinical, biological utility. The regime replaces organic historical continuity with a synthetic, state-mandated mythology.
Wow.
Yeah. Generations are raised on a manufactured narrative that glorifies biological determinism and martial supremacy.
So they don't even want real collaboration.
Exactly. The state doesn't need citizens who collaborate through shared heritage. It needs biological units optimized for labor and compliance. This synthetic mythology provides just enough of a shared reality to keep the gears turning, while deliberately starving the human need for genuine connection.
And that psychological suppression isn't just something you hear on state radio or read in mandated textbooks. It is physically built into the environment.
Oh, absolutely.
A citizen walks out their front door and the terror is literally cemented into the street. The epicenter of this is Welthauptstadt, Germania, which basically represents the pure architectural weaponization of a city.
Yes.
We're talking about monumental structures built from granite and concrete on a scale that is deliberately incomprehensible. The architecture is explicitly designed to dwarf the human observer.
It's oppressive by design.
Exactly. When you stand in front of these buildings, the design forces a physical realization of your own insignificance. You are microscopic, and the collective will of the state is this massive, crushing weight.
And that megalomaniacal drive to dominate, it doesn't stop at city planning or human psychology. It extends to the violent subjugation of the planet itself.
Right.
Most notably through the Atlantropa Project. The regime undertakes the monumental engineering feat of damming the Strait of Gibraltar and completely sealing off the Mediterranean Sea.
Which is just insane to think about.
It is. Driven by this insatiable desire for vast new tracts of arable land and limitless hydroelectric power, they intentionally drain the Mediterranean basin.
But it doesn't just create farmland, right? It creates a continental ecological disaster.
Exactly.
By draining the Mediterranean, they remove the primary source of atmospheric moisture for the entire region. Without that sea to evaporate and create rain clouds, the European climate completely destabilizes.
Yeah.
Southern Europe and North Africa turn into these hyper-arid, heavily salinated wastelands. The Alps literally stop seeing snowfall. The whole continent is plunged into prolonged periods of severe drought and extreme weather.
It's a man-made apocalypse.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They aren't just fighting human enemies, they are treating nature itself as an enemy to be paved over. It's like intentionally inflicting a climate apocalypse on yourself just so you can control the life rafts.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this catastrophic environmental manipulation actually serves the regime's ultimate goal, which is extreme centralized dependency.
Ah, so they want the dependency.
Yes. Paradoxically, by destroying the natural equilibrium, the state tightens its stranglehold on survival. When the rains stop and extreme weather decimates independent farming, you can no longer rely on nature to survive.
You have to rely on them.
Exactly. You can only rely on the regime's centralized water and food distribution networks. The drought becomes a tool of governance. If a region steps out of line, the state simply turns off the aqueducts.
Wow. It's a terrifying feedback loop of control.
It really is.
But managing that level of centralized dependency, distributing food globally,
Right.
dealing with self-inflicted climate disasters, and maintaining absolute dominance over billions of people, that requires an unimaginable technological infrastructure.
Right.
Yet the scientific landscape in this reality is deeply bizarre. It's a system crippled by its own paranoia.
Yeah, the author describes this as an asymmetric scientific landscape, because every aspect of society is driven by state paranoia and the demands of massive militarization. Theoretical sciences face this profound, violent stagnation.
Right.
Fields like theoretical physics, advanced mathematics, and quantum mechanics are heavily suppressed. The state views the act of questioning the fundamental nature of the universe as ideologically impure.
Right, because to invent, say, advanced digital computing, you need theoretical physics. And theoretical physics requires asking open-ended questions.
Exactly.
But in a regime where asking the wrong question gets you executed, that kind of abstract thought dies completely. So instead, all scientific resources are violently channeled into applied engineering, aerospace dominance, and pervasive surveillance architecture.
Yeah, it's very lopsided.
You end up with a society running on brutalist, heavy machinery. Or orbiting above all this, they have hyper-advanced kinetic weapons platforms.
Right, yeah.
These orbital satellites cast a literal shadow over the globe, acting as the ultimate psychological deterrent. But down on the ground, domestic surveillance relies on massive analog data processing engines, punch card databases.
The disparity is jarring. You have a regime capable of putting kinetic weapons into orbit using brute force applied engineering, but tracking the genetic lineage, ideological compliance, and daily labor quotas of billions of people creates a massive logistical bottleneck.
So wait, they have advanced orbiting aerospace platforms, but their domestic surveillance relies on giant analog punch card machines. That feels incredibly unbalanced.
It is unbalanced. Without the elegant, digitized leaps in computing that theoretical physics provides, they are forced to rely on warehouses filled with deafening analog punch card machines.
It's like strapping a jet engine to a horse-drawn carriage.
That's a great analogy.
They have orbital strike capabilities, but processing the daily surveillance data of a single city requires millions of physical paper cards and armies of bureaucrats constantly sorting, punching, and filing.
And despite the clunky nature of that analog technology, the sheer scale of the bureaucratic workforce makes it devastatingly effective.
Really?
Oh yeah, it achieves panoptic totalization. The relentless mechanical tracking of every movement and biological metric results in a society where the concept of privacy is rendered impossible.
Wow.
In fact, the text notes that the word privacy is actually linguistically erased from the societal lexicon. The language is pruned so that citizens cannot even articulate the concepts of being unobserved.
Which forces us to look at the internal human cost. What does living under the shadow of an orbital weapon, combined with the microscopic tracking of a punch card surveillance state, actually do to the human mind?
It breaks it.
Yeah. I mean, how does a brain function when it can't even form the thought of being alone?
The psychological reality of this existence is defined by chronic, inescapable anxiety. To ensure total compliance, the primary socializing force of humanity, the family unit, is systematically dismantled.
Wow, even the family.
Especially the family. The state cannot tolerate loyalty to parents or siblings because biological bonds compete with loyalty to the regime.
So the state basically steps in as the ultimate parent.
Exactly.
Ideological conditioning of children begins from the moment of birth inside state-run institutions. You aren't raising a child, you are housing a future biological unit for the Reich. And because loyalty to the state supersedes all other bonds, it creates a culture of universal paranoia. Neighbors, friends, and family members are aggressively conditioned to act as informants against one another. You literally can't trust the person sleeping next to you.
To manage this paranoia, the state security apparatus evolves beyond mere police or paramilitaries. They become this omnipresent socio-political priesthood.
A priesthood, that's a scary thought.
Very. They don't just enforce laws, they dictate acceptable thought, behavior, and even procreation. Under this immense pressure, counterculture simply cannot exist.
It's impossible.
Yeah, there is no underground resistance because the logistical and psychological infrastructure needed to organize dissent has been structurally rendered impossible. You can't organize a rebellion when you can't even trust your own children, and your daily labor is tracked by millions of punch cards.
So, what does this all mean? If there's no underground resistance left, if the external threats are contained by the radioactive moat of the Twilight War, and total submission of the populace has been achieved, Why does the text describe a continuous cycle of ideological purges and genetic cleansing rippling through the highest levels of the party hierarchy?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, like if you've won, why keep purging your own loyalists?
This raises an important question. It reveals the core cannibalistic mechanic of this alternative reality.
Okay.
A totalitarian behemoth of this scale, built entirely on the concept of eternal struggle, actually requires the perpetual invention of internal enemies to justify its terrifying machinery.
I
The vast security apparatus is an organism that needs to consume to survive. If there are no enemies left to fight, the socio-political priesthood has no reason to exist, and the total war economy loses its justification.
The machine needs fuel. If it runs out of foreign enemies, it just starts eating itself to keep the engine running.
Precisely. It creates a society locked in a paralyzing state of hypervigilance, where survival depends on constantly shifting adherence to increasingly arbitrary definitions of ideological tyranny.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. No one, not even the highest-ranking officials, is immune to sudden reclassification as an enemy of the state. The ultimate outcome of this regime's triumph isn't prosperity or stability.
No.
It is a sterile, mechanized dystopia, a global graveyard of human potential marked by the chilling, uninterrupted silence of total submission.
It is a staggering and frankly suffocating projection. As we pull back from this deep dive into the sheer weight of this hypothetical reality really settles in.
It really does.
We've seen the absolute weaponization of literally everything. Geopolitics turned into a radioactive standoff, the Mediterranean Sea weaponized to create climate dependency, technology stunted into brutalist surveillance, and the very concepts of family, language, and trust dismantled and repurposed into machinery for subjugation.
It is the most comprehensive vision of absolute control, mapping out how every variable of human existence can be optimized for terror.
And while exploring a text this dark is a heavy undertaking, there is a profound utility in doing so.
Absolutely.
Taking a hard, analytical look at these extreme projections illuminates the immense value and the inherent fragility of the institutions that structure our own reality. The ability to engage in diplomacy, the freedom of the scientific method to ask open questions, the sanctity of privacy, and just the basic human trust we place in our families and neighbors.
Yeah.
These aren't permanent fixtures of the universe, they are fragile achievements that require constant maintenance.
By understanding the structural mechanics of how a society could theoretically dismantle these pillars, we become much more adept at recognizing their vital importance in our own world. We learn to spot the foundational cracks before they spread.
I want to reiterate, as we bring this deep dive to a close, that our analysis today was an objective breakdown of the source text's alternative timeline. We are simply unpacking the mechanics of this world to emphasize the vital role of critical thinking when analyzing extreme conceptual scenarios. It's an exercise in understanding the anatomy of totalitarianism.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to ponder on your own.
Okay.
Given everything we've unpacked today about how this hypothetical regime functions, if a system's ultimate survival relies on perpetually inventing enemies from within its most loyal ranks, does absolute total control inevitably become a machine of its own slow, self-inflicted destruction?
A heavy question that will definitely stay with you long after we've closed the book on this timeline. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be waiting for you next time. Goodbye.